Welcome back to the Looking Center YouTube channel. And today I'm excited because we're speaking with Mellissa, who is our adult and couples therapist here. And today we're going to cover, for all intents and purposes, I would imagine one of the most important topics, which is emotional boundaries. And it's an important concept because there's so many people out there may have an idea what it is, but they don't really know how to have signs or symptoms that it's been punctured or penetrated, and most importantly, not really knowing how to set them effectively so that it's protecting you, but also not pissing other people off. Because I think in today's world, it's a little bit of like, either I'm not setting him at all, or I'm setting him so rigidly that you're just beginning to piss other people off. So we have Mellissa here to talk about that, because I just think it's such an important concept in today's world. So how do you know if you're not doing a great job setting them? Because there's a level of penetration and encroachment that might happen for that individual. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like, how does it look like maybe in the room when you're seeing it?
Sure. I think first I want to just clarify what is an emotional boundary.
Right.
And I think that there are boundaries that are really based on the premise that, our emotions and our emotional well-being is our responsibility, and we have control over them. I think the lack of emotional boundaries or our boundaries being crossed can show up differently for different people. Sometimes I find that, there might be someone who really struggles with the ability to say no.
Right.
Someone who really struggles with the ability to take a step back and create space between their work-life balance, or even sometimes in relationships, being able to take a step back and say, this is something I'm not going to allow to happen anymore. I don't know if you have any kind of thoughts on specifics that you've seen.
No,
but,
I think that's exactly what it is. It seems like a lot of it, at least what I notice, is that people feel drained.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're oftentimes overextend themselves.
Yeah.
Be it with work, as you've mentioned, be it with their significant other. Maybe they don't want to disappoint them, so they take extra tasks, or they say yes to things that they really shouldn't. And most importantly, sometimes they say yes to things that are actually not beneficial. So I work with a lot of parents. Yeah. And they often, what they do is they don't respect their own boundary because they think I have to do it for the kid. But I always try to point out, but what you're doing when you're not listening to your own sort of self and your own boundaries, what happens is that you're doing extra things for the kid, and you're not really teaching them that first of all, they need to be doing it. And second of all, you're really setting yourself up to resent your kids later.
Yeah.
And once we talk about it in those terms, a lot of people say, oh, wow, I could see that a little bit differently, and they're more likely to set those boundaries. So speaking of emotional boundaries, so how do you know that they're in place? Like, are there ways that people can notice them? Is there a way that people can know that, oh, okay, I'm doing it and it's better for me?
Yeah. I think the first thing though that I typically like to start with is just even helping my clients understand the purpose of the emotions and how the emotions play a role in setting emotional boundaries. So I think the first step is even being able to practice self-attunement.
Okay.
Being able to tune into yourself and recognize what's happening inside of me emotionally, mentally, physically.
Sure.
That can, sort of lay the kind of framework for what kind of boundaries you need to, maybe put in place. Because sometimes we think of our emotions as being a nuisance, right, or kind of, we judge them and don't see them as really having a purpose, when our emotions really are, indicating a need, So I think first it's being able to recognize, what am I feeling right now? Am I feeling drained? Am I feeling overwhelmed? Am I feeling disrespected? Even anger can a lot of the times be, an indication that there's something wrong here. There's something not right happening here. So I think being able to just tune in and recognize our emotions is really the first step to knowing how to set a boundary.
For sure.
And then I think that there's some more specific ways. I don't know if you want me to kind of get into.
Well, I think that would be good, because I'm just thinking of some of the viewers, and they might be interested. Okay, let's say I kind of know this about myself, that I'm not, let's say, the best at setting it. Right. And we just talked a little bit about like how people can feel drained or overwhelmed or saying yes too many times.
Yeah.
So I am wondering, okay, first I got to attune to what I'm actually feeling, right? Because a lot of the times the focus may be on how to like even people please, right? So then they're missing it. So it sounds like the first step is at least to start identifying what the emotions might be like. Because to your point, it's almost like a framework to like a building block to how to set up that emotional boundary.
Absolutely.
What would be the next step?
Sure, yeah. So definitely that self-attunement, I think, is the foundation, that first piece. I think the other piece of it is actually giving yourself permission to prioritize yourself, your needs, your comfort, and your safety, which I think is something that a lot of us struggle to do. You've mentioned people pleasing, many times, that, actually giving yourself permission to prioritize yourself. I think another piece of it is actually taking responsibility and ownership over your emotional well-being, right? That's your responsibility and not the responsibility of anyone else.
Right.
So when you can think about it in that way, I think it's also another piece of actually doing something to set a boundary.
Sure.
And then the actual how-to, the way that I typically describe it to clients is boundaries can be put in place verbally or non-verbally.
Okay.
So, non-verbal examples of emotional boundaries can be as simple as not responding right away, not answering that work email right away, getting up, walking away, letting the phone go to voicemail. Even sometimes I'll tell clients if they're at a family gathering or something that they know is going to be really overwhelming, or there's going to be a lot of demands, take an extra 5 minutes in the bathroom, right? That's nonverbal. Those are ways that we can set emotional boundaries and protect ourselves that don't require communicating to anybody else. And the other two, I think one can be a verbal boundary that we don't give an explanation, where we say, I need a break. We may say, I can't do this right now. We may say, I need to call you back. And then other times it does require an explanation, or we may want to give an explanation. I see, I really see a lot of benefit with couples and in relationships, how important it can be to say, I don't feel safe right now.
Okay.
You yelling, calling me names during this conflict is hurting me, making me feel uncomfortable. I need to take a step back. And I can come back to this when we can speak to each other in a respectful way. Okay. So that's kind of the way I think about setting either verbal or nonverbal boundaries.
Yeah. No, I could see how that could be so applicable in some of those challenging moments. One thing I was just kind of thinking, hearing you speak, is this idea of, if the person is not really good at setting it, or it wasn't familiar, let's say before this conversation, and they're beginning to do it, or like taking ownership, accountability, tuning into their emotion, that shift could be challenging, because I see sometimes, be it in couples or be it individually, the client is concerned that if they start prioritizing their needs, then it might alienate their partner, right? Like, so just that worry, I would imagine, is one of the things that may get in the way of setting effective boundaries. So maybe we could talk a little bit about maybe that, or other ways that there are some interferences, some difficulties, challenges in actually doing it. Because in a way, you're right, setting it is pretty simple. I think that the bigger job is like talking about some things that interfere, and how do we move that block so that naturally we prioritize ourselves and understand what we need. Not to say that we can't compromise, but it means that we have a voice and that we're present in that room with our partner.
Absolutely. So I think that's a great point of the barriers or the things that can really get in the way of setting boundaries, and specifically emotional boundaries. And also, to put a plug out there is, if you are facing these barriers, these might be, indicating that you might need some extra help or support, or, the support of a therapist. One of them I find is often trauma. Relational wounds and trauma can really be a big reason why people have probably for a long time struggled to either practice that attunement or be able to, put boundaries in place. Another is family systems, so the roles that we often play in our families, or maybe the patterns and themes that have existed for a long time in our families, that certain things can be normal and, expected. And so when we try to break out of that, when we try to, set a boundary or do something that might break away from the norm, that can be really uncomfortable. It can be, not accepted by the group, which can make it really difficult. Another one is difficult people. I think we've even done presentations on, how to deal with difficult people. But, unfortunately, we also sometimes come into contact with people who just don't respect boundaries, or may even be manipulative and find ways to try and have their needs met and don't know how to respect the needs of others, which it's really important actually to have boundaries with those types of people, but it can make it really difficult. So another one, I think, to your point is maybe just the beliefs and myths around boundaries. That boundaries are selfish, or boundaries are controlling, or things like that, I think can also really get in the way that make it hard to set boundaries with people.
Yeah, I get it. That was actually my next question, is because I think for some people out there, to your point, emotional boundaries may seem selfish. And I do you have any thoughts on how to strike that balance, right? Because we don't want to be kind of oversharing and overdoing, but we also don't want to use the facade of I'm doing emotional boundaries as a substitute for being very selfish, right? How do you, is there, I would imagine there isn't, but is there this way of being that allows you to be accessible, that allows you to compromise, and at the same time know when you're feeling disrespected, and being able to say no, right? Because if we're thinking about, as you and I are couples therapists, as we know, too much giving doesn't work and too little giving doesn't work, right? So I'm wondering if there's any thoughts that you have, or you've observed, have noticed, or learned about, that where striking that balance of focusing on yourself when needed, and yet effectively being able to be accessible when somebody else needs you. Let's say if we're talking about a romantic relationship.
It is absolutely a middle ground, and I agree. It is finding a balance. I think, though, as far as the myths, I think really understanding, though, that emotional boundaries are not selfish, and that they actually can really benefit relationships and make relationships healthier. Because when we find ways to preserve our resources, take care of our emotions, it makes us show up in a more effective way, right? So if I'm not taking that break that I need, I'm actually probably going to be more likely to yell at you, to be irritable, to be short-tempered. So I think even just shifting sometimes the way that we think that boundaries are not selfish, boundaries are important, and they're not only happening in relationships, they also, I think, are happening in our relationship with our job, our relationship with our day, our schedule. So I think that's a big piece of it. And then to your point of finding that balance, I think remembering that, we can hold two truths, right? We can respect and acknowledge our emotions and take care of ourselves. Take 5 extra minutes in the bathroom, carve out, a moment for mindfulness, whatever that you might need to do for yourself. And we can be compassionate, listening, understanding partners. That those two things don't have to cancel.
For sure. No, I really like that. I really like that, because it may seem a little paradoxical to at least some, that taking more time, more effective time for yourself might feel like you're actually taking away from the relationship. But it sounds like what you're saying, which I really like, is the idea that if we can recharge and we're feeling at least emotionally ready to give, we're more likely to give, we're more likely to effectively show up in the relationship, because we're coming from a place of feeling recharged rather than drained, right? It's hard to show up the best version of yourself if you're drained. If you're feeling recharged, you're more likely to be accessible. You're more likely to listen. You're more likely to have more patience. And I think that's one of the things that potentially some of the viewers can take away, is that emotional boundaries are healthy for yourself and also makes you the best version of yourself for whatever relationship, be it a job, be it with your kids, be it with your significant other family members. So I really like the way you kind of positioned it, because I think it for some might seem paradoxical, but I think the way you phrased it, I hope really resonates with some of our viewers, that taking time to assess where you are, understanding your emotional attunement, understand of how to be able to take 5 to make sure that you are feeling respected in your relationship, actually makes you more likely to be more effective for yourself and for that other part, be it a job or be it your significant other or family. Awesome. Thank you so much, Mellissa. This was a great conversation, and I really hope some of the viewers can really take away some of those key points and really see emotional boundaries as really what they're intended to be: healthy for you and healthy for your relationship. Thanks so much as always for tuning in. Take care. Bye-bye.